budget.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton, for 2 hours packed full of unfiltered opinions, unique takes and fiery debates. I guarantee you blockbuster guests and exclusive reporting with no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I think there is a culture of collusion, quite frankly.
And no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Good morning and welcome to Sunday with Michael Portillo. But this week with me, Emily Carver, I will aim, of course, to fill Michael's mighty shows for the next 2 hours, bringing you a mixture of politics, arts, culture and world affairs. So kicking off with politics first, I'll be joined by Madeline Grant of The Telegraph and policy researcher Laurie Laban to discuss a chaotic resumption of the parliamentary calendar for the government after the summer recess, with dodgy concrete in schools, a controversial trade deal with India, all on Rishi Sunak's plate. Now, after that, we'll be talking to war reporter David Patrikarakos as he prepares to return to the front lines of the conflict in Ukraine. He's reported on the war since it started, not least year, but all the way back in 2014. And he'll be telling us what he thinks the greatest threat to a Ukrainian victory is. Looking forward to that. And the Northern Ireland Legacy Bill has passed the House of Commons despite unanimous opposition from within Northern Ireland itself. The bill would grant conditional immunity for all crimes committed during the Troubles. Many former soldiers support it, of course, but we'll be speaking to victims' representative Kenny Donaldson on why it's so unpopular for others. And we'll also have Stefan Kyriazis to reflect on the last of the summer's theatre productions, including a little bit of Shakespeare. And later in the show, we'll be debating the ongoing Kissgate scandal that's roiling Spanish football and has seen the coach who led the women's team to World Cup victory sacked. But before all of that, here is your latest news headlines with Tatiana Sanchez.
Emily, thank you very much. 1 minute past 11. This is the latest from the GB newsroom. More than 2,000 people have died in what's described as the deadliest earthquake in Morocco since 1960. Survivors slept in the open for the second night after the 6.8 magnitude quake struck remote areas of the Atlas Mountains yesterday. Many fear their homes are no longer safe to return to, with the impact being felt right across the country. More than 2,000 people have been injured. Half are in a critical condition. The Prime Minister says he's confronted Chinese Premier Li Qiang at the G20 summit in New Delhi over Beijing's alleged spying by two men in Westminster. The Sunday Times reported a man in his 30s and a man in his 20s were arrested in March under the Official Secrets Act. One of the men was a researcher with links to several Tory MPs, including Foreign Affairs Committee Chairwoman Alicia Cairns and Security Minister Tom Tugendhat. Both MPs denied any contact with the researcher. The Prime Minister says if this is true, it's totally unacceptable.
The right approach is to engage with people, but to raise the concerns that we have. That's what our allies do, and our strategy is completely aligned with our closest allies, whether that's America, Canada, Australia, Japan. You know, all these countries engage with China, raise areas of disagreement, as I did today on a range of different topics, but in particular to register my very strong concern about any interference with parliamentary democracy, which is obviously unacceptable.
The Justice Secretary says around 40 inmates have been moved out from Wandsworth Prison amid an investigation into Daniel Khalif's escape. The former soldier was on the run for 4 days after strapping himself to the bottom of a food delivery van. He was tackled from a bicycle on a canal towpath in Norfolk by an officer yesterday. Alex Chalk says the prison is overcrowded, but promises the government is doing all it can to provide resources.
Out of an abundance of caution, we've taken 40 out to move elsewhere, just as we get to the bottom of what happened. Now, that is a sensible, interim, precautionary step. And I just also want to make the point about Wandsworth. You know, there have been issues with crowding, which I accept, which goes back for not just 5 years, or 25, 30 years. But the difference is we are doing something about it. So very, very significant investment going into prisons. 2 already built, 1 currently under construction. And these are big, big jails.
Russia has launched another air attack on Kyiv in the early hours of this morning, with blasts ringing out across the capital for almost 2 hours. A video has captured one of the 32 drones heading for residential buildings, with drone debris falling on several of the city's central districts. The attack comes as yesterday's G20 summit declaration stopped short of condemning Russia for the war in Ukraine, but rather highlighted the human suffering in the conflict. Ukraine says the declaration is nothing to be proud of. One of Kyiv's residents spoke of her fear during the latest attack.
It was a very frightening experience. I can't even put it into words. I heard a sound flying over, a rustling sound. Then there was a powerful explosion, followed by a huge flash of light. I live on the first floor, and the explosion wave was so strong that glass began falling down. My window curtain tore off, and the jars I had on my windowsill were shattered.
Some MPs are warning defence cuts have left a gap in the UK's ability to fight from the air that will last well into the 2030s. The Commons Defence Committee says cuts set out in 2021 leaves Britain dangerously exposed and warned the military's combat air fleet is alarmingly low in number. Tory committee chair Tobias Ellwood warned of turbulent times ahead if ministers don't change course. MPs have noted, though, that the Ministry of Defence will spend more than £55 million sending pilots overseas for fast jet training because of a lack of aircraft availability. And finally, thunderstorm warnings are in place across the UK after 6 days of temperatures over 30 degrees Celsius. It comes as yesterday was the hottest day of the year so far, with 32.7 degrees recorded at Heathrow. Forecasters predict today could be the 7th day in a row that temperatures reach above 30 degrees. But despite that, a yellow thunderstorm warning is in place this afternoon for Northern Ireland, northern parts of England and Wales, and as well as southern Scotland. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now it's back to Emily.
Thank you, Tatiana. So Rishi Sunak probably knew better than to expect a slow start to the parliamentary calendar after the summer recess. But if he did think that he's been thoroughly disabused in the last week. The calamity of school closures caused by defective concrete, some lively outbursts from his Education Secretary, has given the Labour Party quite a bit of ammunition to attack the government with. The Prime Minister is also facing many questions over when he'll sign a trade deal with India. So to discuss those stories and much more, I am joined by Madeline Grant of The Telegraph and policy researcher Laurie Laban. Thank you very much indeed, both of you. So, first week back after the recess, the government's supposed to be setting the agenda, or they'd like to be setting the agenda. Instead, it appears as though they're fighting fires on many fronts.
Yes, and it feels like it has been this way for quite some time. It's been hard for them to wrest control of the agenda and talk about anything other than just the kind of damage limitation exercises that we seem to see week after week. I mean, this was a very unfortunate timing for this issue to spring up. I mean, the government would argue that what's happened is that the experts who were advising them about the concrete suddenly changed their mind and they pivoted, taking on board that new information. However, the fact that this comes after when so many other things are going wrong in the country, that so little seems to work as it did before, that it simply plays into that sense that, you know, everything is just a bit more rubbish. And therefore, I think it's much more damaging than it would have been on its own as an issue.
Yes, it does feel that way, doesn't it? Quite a lot of ammo to the opposition, particularly with Concrete Gate. The idea that Britain is crumbling is certainly being used by those who are, just to continue on this, the marketing, the advertising, the social media campaigns from the Labour Party.
Yes.
They've got a lot to go on, haven't they?
They've suddenly got very good at social media. I haven't seen...
They have. Who have they hired?
Labour missives being this successful till now. But I think when you're working with that kind of raw material, it's hard not to do a good job of it.
Right, well, Laurie, I think I can bring you in now. What's your take on this? Do you think Keir Starmer is capitalising enough from these types of incidents?
I think that, well, firstly, I feel sorry for Rishi Sunak.
Oh, I'm so sorry, Laurie. Your mic isn't working. We'll go back to Madeline for more astute analysis. Do you think the Labour Party is making the most of these kind of...
Oh, they definitely are. I mean, I was in the Commons on Wednesday and I overheard Keir Starmer telling someone on the balcony outside Parliament, like, Gillian Keegan is the gift, you know, the gift that keeps on giving. It's absolutely what you want. And it's quite useful for Keir Starmer because he's been keeping up a policy of strategic ambiguity, you know, not giving away any information about what he truly believes. And only now are we getting to some of the kind of policy meat. And this is quite helpful because it means that people are not asking questions about what he might do as Prime Minister. They're just thinking, God, it's so terrible. I mean, anyone but these guys.
Also, it doesn't help very much that many Tory MPs are briefing papers like The Telegraph saying how awful Gillian Keegan is and how they don't support the direction of travel in the government. Lots of infighting, as usual, within the Conservative Party. Laurie, what's your take? Is Keir Starmer, is he gaining ground?
Yeah, inevitably. I think if you threaten by your primary school falling in on your kids' heads, that there's no guarantee of enough funding in the Air Force, such that if we have to fight a war again, we can probably defend ourselves. It's a £10 billion unspent maintenance bill in the NHS. You're going to end up inevitably gaining ground. I think there are two things that are significant for me. One is I feel sorry for Rishi Sunak. Rishi Sunak came in as an MP partway through our current period of Tory rule. He is essentially having to deal with the failures to invest that happened between 2010 and 2015. A lot of these problems can be traced back to the unnecessary cuts in certain budgets at that time. On the Keir Starmer side, I think that what that does is partly provide an opportunity to take advantage of those Tory failures that are now coming back to haunt Sunak, but to get the scale of votes that Labour could get at the next election, it can't just be, well, we're just not them. There has got to be some kind of vision for why we are different to them. What more can be brought?
I think maybe they will be able to rely on we're not the Conservatives, because there is a large coalition of voters growing. It's interesting that you say certain budgets were cut and they're dealing with the impact of that now, because that's true, because spending has continued to rise overall, but perhaps the government has got it wrong in terms of where they were spending.
So when you want to cut something as a politician, the easy thing to do is to cut what's called the capital budget. This is the budget that goes into things like buildings or equipment, right? Think hospitals or schools.
The boring long-term stuff.
The boring long-term stuff.
Yeah.
So you don't notice...
Treasury also loves to cut this stuff.
Treasury loves to cut this stuff. You don't notice initially because people don't notice that you didn't invest in a building in year one, 10 years down the line, and your primary school roof is falling in on you. So those capital budgets, those were the budgets that were cut alongside others, but they come back to haunt you down the line, and that's what we're seeing
And is
now.
this just a consequence of our democratic model, of just the way that we do things, our parliament?
Well, you know, I would say that I think some of Labour's criticism of the Tories is actually quite disingenuous here, because bear in mind that, you know, in 2010, the economy was in a dire situation and there was no money to spend. Currently, the economy is in a dire situation, and Labour are promising to basically do what Jeremy Hunt is doing. So I think the idea that had they been in charge during those austerity years, that it would have been radically different, that Alistair Darling would have opened the spending taps where the Tories wouldn't, given that that's what they're doing, that's what they're promising to do now, is I just think a bit of an unfair criticism. But the fact is that, you know, whatever, regardless of global conditions or bad luck, if you're in charge, you get the blame for it. You know, them's the breaks, as Boris Johnson said.
And you don't really hear much fight back from the Conservatives at the moment. It does feel as though they've run out of a bit of steam, but who knows? Rishi Sunak has been quoted in the press saying he thinks he's, you know, still could win the next general election, so we shall see. But it's, of course, Rishi Sunak has been at the G20 summit, Laurie. Indian trade deal may be on the cards, may not be. We're not sure exactly what the resolution will be. He's going to have to make big compromises in whatever trade deal we end up having with India, because India is an absolutely massive market, 1.3, 1.4 billion people. Do you think more visas should be on the table?
I think it shows a tension between Brexit as a project about immigration and Brexit as a project about trade deals and Britain in the world. And we're seeing that tension, I think, playing out here. And in some ways, the India trade deal is the greatest expression of that. One way to partly get around that, or at least to ensure that the focus doesn't remain exclusively on that, is to make deals around what's described as industrial policy, that countries work together to progress technologies of the future. We've seen that with America and France, both at the G20, saying we should make deals around certain technologies. We've done it with Australia and the US when it comes to nuclear submarines. We're starting to flirt with that with India. We've got this new gigafactory that makes EV batteries down in Somerset that's being developed with Tata, the company that owns Jaguar Land Rover, I think. But there are other ways to do that. So some of those deals around technologies could slightly duck that issue, but that tension is going to have to be resolved in the Tory party.
Well, because Rishi Sunak seems utterly convinced that attaching ourselves to India's booming economy would be a fantastic thing. He's praised them for emphasising maths teaching, technology teaching, science, engineering. He's really talking up Britain's relationship with India. Is that what Brexiteers want, us to attach our economy to India's?
I don't think that there's any one thing that Brexiteers wanted, but, I mean, during the referendum, they made much of us being an outward-looking country, more of a kind of Atlanticist global country than the one that had historically, you know, fallen under the EU umbrella, which I think was fair enough. I mean, I think when it comes to what Rishi Sunak is doing in India, you know, there is this tension between the visas and the deals on other stuff, and he's been very cagey so far about how much progress is actually being made. He's trying his very best not to put any definitive kind of deadlines on what's going on there. So I think he probably is aware that the public has, on many occasions, expressed their views about immigration and made it clear that they don't want any more. And nevertheless, under this government, we've got to unprecedented levels of immigration. So I think they must realise that, you know, that is not an area where you could liberalise further, even if it is in keeping with the global ambitions.
But I'm not so sure about that. I mean, Liz Truss, in her dying days as Prime Minister, there was so much briefing about how she wanted to, you know, open borders more so. And Rishi Sunak, many people see him as being internationalist in his approach, so he seems quite relaxed about immigration, yet he tries to have tough rhetoric, doesn't he? Another person who's been having some tough rhetoric around illegal immigration is Sir Keir Starmer. He's trying to present himself as, and I think he'll be going on to talk about this more in the weeks to come, about how Labour are the party to tackle illegal immigration. Do you think anyone believes that?
Yeah, I can imagine a lot of people end up believing it, partly because they're so frustrated with the state of the Tory immigration regime. Again, with the first segment, we're talking about cuts to the Home Office early on in things like equipment and other things meant that they didn't have the right kit to process people, and it's ended up costing more because we then have to pay for the hotel. So I could imagine a lot of people thinking that another group of people running the government would actually mean that works out better, yeah.
Well, maybe. I mean, on the other hand, we've got Rishi Sunak at the G20 summit. He's been palling up with the likes of Giorgia Meloni, the Italian premier, talking to her about Rwanda-style schemes. Lots of European countries are thinking of similar schemes. Does that take the heat out of our Rwanda scheme, perhaps, if other countries are trying to follow suit?
I'm not sure it would take the heat out of the debate that's currently happening in the UK about it. I think politics is incredibly fractious at the moment. Social media makes everything even more fractious than it would otherwise have been. And I don't think that the international realities are going to make that much of a difference. However, it is interesting that we seem to exist in a bubble in which we don't really look at what other countries are doing. I mean, for instance, if and when Keir Starmer wins and, we have a Labour government, we will be a massive international outlier in having a centre-left or left-wing government. I mean, across Europe, there is a general shift towards the right, and people are discussing radical solutions to dealing with immigration. And I think sometimes we have this feeling that we're kind of uniquely bad, uniquely reactionary. It's just not borne out by the evidence.
It's just not true, is it, really? We're actually pretty lax when it comes to illegal immigration compared to other countries around the world, not least, of course, Israel, who had issues very recently too. So that's all we've got time for on this. Thank you very much indeed, Madeline Grant from The Telegraph and Laurie Laban, policy researcher. Thank you very much for taking us through the first week back at school for the politicians anyway. Stay with us, as in a few minutes we'll be chatting to war reporter David Patrikarakos as he prepares to head back to the front lines of Ukraine. Stay tuned.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, my name's Rachel Ayres and welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast brought to you by the Met Office. So some of you have woken up to heavy showers and thunderstorms, and these will continue throughout much of today. And these are being brought up from the continent, so through the English Channel and making their way northeastwards, with a cold front just bringing some rain, cloud and outbreaks of drizzle to the far northwest of Scotland. So heavy showers and thunderstorms really the name of the game throughout the rest of today. These could bring some pretty torrential downpours and frequent lightning, hail and also some strong gusty winds at times. But we are still looking at temperatures getting into the low 30s across the southeast once again today. As we head into this evening, those thunderstorms and showers will continue to make their way northeastwards, lingering for a time into the early hours of Monday across southern parts of Scotland, but drying up elsewhere with the best of any clear spells in the east. A bit of low cloud mist and fog though in places, especially for western coasts, and it's looking like another warm and humid night. So to start the new working week, some brightness, especially in the east at first, but cloud and outbreaks of rain making their way southeastwards throughout the day, with some heavy showers and potentially some further thunderstorms developing just ahead of this. But still feeling pretty pleasant in any of that sunshine, though temperatures not climbing quite as high as we've seen throughout the weekend.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com? You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nah, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Michael Portillo with me, Emily Carver. Now, David, Patrick Karakos is one of the few reporters who have been covering the war in Ukraine since its very beginning. And by that, I don't mean the full-scale invasion of last year, but the smaller Russian invasion of the Donbass region back in 2014. Now, he's preparing to return to the country next month to resume his coverage from the front line. That's as some progress is reported in Ukraine's counter-offensive against entrenched Russian positions in the south, and also as the US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, promises more American aid. So David joins me now live. David, thank you very much indeed for joining me this afternoon. You're soon to go back to Ukraine to continue your reporting of this conflict. Can you tell me, we've got mixed reports on the progress Ukraine is making. I understand it is slow, but it is happening.
Yeah, I think that's very much the case. So when I was there last, I was fortunate enough to I got the access to visit several points in the front. And I think this is actually an example where Ukrainian messaging has been slightly off for once. I think people around the world thought that the counteroffensive meant Ukraine en masse would get up thousands of soldiers and break through the Russian lines. What in fact they're doing is probing up and down all that line of contact between Russia and the Ukrainian forces to punch holes in it. And it seems that they have done that now. Now, the job is very difficult. The Russians, in typically contemptible fashion, have just mined everything. There are 3 lines of Russian troops, 3 lines of mines. So it's going to be a slow process, but it does seem that we're seeing some kind of process. So yes, there is cause for hope, but we need to understand that this is going to take a while. This is a mass, wide-scale industrial war. It works in years, not months.
Well, it's good to hear that you believe there is cause for hope. Do you have any idea? I mean, I guess this is a guessing game, but any time frame for victory, any time frame for an end to this brutal conflict?
Well, it's a good question. It's one that people ask me all the time. And the first thing to say is, what do you mean by victory? What do you mean by victory or loss? Is it possible now for the Russians to take Kiev, hoist that Russian flag over the Rada? Probably, almost certainly not. Is it possible for Kiev to throw the Russians out of every single bit of their territory? Probably not. But look, what we're talking about now is making slow gains. You keep pushing and you keep pushing, and then come 2024, when those American and foreign F-16s finally arrive, then you might start to see a real progress. Bear in mind, Ukraine is doing something that is antithetical to the doctrine of modern warfare. It is fighting a mass war without air cover. Now, if those F-16s come in and the Ukrainians have started to punch through some of those Russian mine lines, then we could see some real changes. But we're talking about 2024, 2025 now. This is very much the long game. And can I just say, this is what the Russians know, and this is what they're praying. They're banking on the fact that we in the West are going to get tired, going to get bored, going to pull out like we did in Iraq and Afghanistan. They're playing a waiting game, and they're desperately looking at the US elections.
Well, that's why it's so important to speak to people like you to get the very, very latest on the conflict, so it does stay in the news, so it does stay front and centre in people's minds. Now, you talk about support. Perhaps it may die down if people get bored of the conflict even, which hopefully it won't. But Secretary of State Antony Blinken in the US has announced $1 billion more in aid. Now, this isn't just military aid, but this is also aid, humanitarian aid, aid to help the economy and so on.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, this is a really good and strong and positive sign of support going forward. But someone the other day to me said, this is a great sign of American support. I would say at the moment it's a great sign of Democrat support. Let's see what happens in those American elections. I can tell you that is what everyone in Ukraine is worried about. This is not to say, by the way, that Republicans will abandon support whoever wins, but that is very much on people's minds. But can I just make a point here that's quite relevant to a lot of things discussed on GB News? What is being hammered out on the battlefields of Ukraine and Russia, or Ukraine rather, between Ukraine and Russia, goes way beyond that. This really is a battle for the future of large parts of Europe and the West. Are we in the West going to persist? Are we going to abandon our allies and flee like the Russians and in the background Chinese believe? Or are we going to stand firm and say no to this sort of aggression? Because it does genuinely affect us all. So I think it's really important what happens now. And the fact that stations like yourself that keep this story in the news is very, very important in the wider picture.
David, you say that the Democrats support Ukraine in this conflict and they're putting huge amounts of money and military support towards the campaign. Are you saying then that a Republican victory in the presidential election would put that at risk?
Not necessarily. I'm saying this is the concern. There is a concern that Donald Trump may win, and he said obviously a lot of things that are very favourable to Vladimir Putin. That said, Donald Trump was also the man that assassinated Qasem Soleimani when no Democrat administration before him dared to do it. So we don't know. What I'm saying is we know that the Democrat administration has put a lot of money into Ukraine. As you say, it's put a lot of support into Ukraine. Without it, the Ukrainians would not be able to fight on. The concern now is what's going to happen if there is a change of government.
And David, just very quickly, Boris Johnson has travelled to Ukraine to receive an honorary degree for all that he's done to support Ukraine in this conflict as Prime Minister and beyond that too. Do you think that perhaps we're lacking political leaders who grasp the severity of this conflict, who grasp how important it is to back Ukraine to the hilt in this conflict with Russia, and that we need more people like Boris Johnson?
Let me tell you something. Boris Johnson is absolutely loved in Ukraine. They absolutely love Boris. And being a British foreign correspondent, war correspondent, whatever, I spent 10 years going abroad and everyone would shout Iraq at me in an accusatory manner. You go to Ukraine and they're like, you're British. Oh, thank God, we love you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. This is about, look, we talked about Brexit, seizing control, post-Brexit, global Britain. You want global Britain? This is global Britain. Britain at the centre of the biggest crisis in world affairs for the last 2 years. Long may it continue.
Well, thank you very much indeed for bringing us the latest. David Patrikarakos there bringing us that. Now, when the just-mentioned Boris Johnson put forward the Northern Ireland Legacy Bill, he said he wanted to draw a line under the Troubles. But for thousands of victims who suffered terrible losses during the terror campaign, the prospect of losing any hope of justice, however remote, is proving hard to bear. Now, the government's bill is mainly aimed at ending the prosecution of elderly military veterans for actions taken during the conflict. And it does have support among many veterans, but it's facing unanimous opposition in Northern Ireland itself, from where I am joined by victims campaigner Kenny Donaldson. Thank you very much indeed, Kenny. Of course, there are many different views on this legacy bill. Huge number of veterans, support groups. Johnny Mercer, of course, the politician who's been pioneering this bill really in recent months, recent years. Many mixed views on it. What is yours? Do you not think that, considering the number of quite elderly veterans who have been caught up in legal action many, many years after the Troubles, many, many years, that you can understand why people think, actually, maybe we need to draw a line under this?
Well, I think first we have to take a little step back. We're 25 years on now from a Belfast Agreement, and what your listeners need to understand is that for that agreement to ever be possible, it was able to be secured on the back of the generosity of spirit of victims and survivors. It was they who had to make the compromises that wider society did not. And what's happened over the last 25 years is that there have been a range of covert decisions taken by successive governments in undermining the rule of law, whether it was the on-the-run assurance letters, royal prerogatives of mercy, even the very decommissioning process, which enabled terrorists to put to beyond use those armaments which held the ballistics and evidence to the actual crimes that were committed. So there are circumstances where there have been a number of military veterans who have been put through the ringer on a number of occasions, and certainly we don't support that. But what I do support certainly is anyone who has committed a crime, whether they are wearing a uniform or not wearing a uniform, they have to be held equally before the law, because otherwise what basis does our society have? We are the United Kingdom and we're better than all of that. And what I would say is that there will be a very small number of individuals, if they receive any benefit as a result of this bill, within the side of veterans. And we do need to be very cognizant, Emily, that veterans who are based in GB and who have served 3 and 6 months duty here in Northern Ireland, that's a very different premise than a veteran who has lived in Northern Ireland all their life and has been subject to the risk of terror each and every day over a 30-odd year period.
So if you don't like the sound of this bill that's going through and the current system that's administering justice for Troubles-related crime isn't working, what sort of alternative would you like to see? What sort of alternative would the victims' families that you deal with, that you speak to, what would they like to see?
I suppose, Emily, we did put forward our proposals in the aftermath of the Stormont House Agreement of 2014, or as we would dub it, the Stormont House Disagreement, because there was never uniformity of support across the main 5 Northern Ireland political parties for that said agreement. And what we want to see is a proper investigation into each and every crime that was committed over the course of the Troubles period, and where there is evidence to push forward into a position of prosecution that should happen. And where that is not the case, that maximum information and disclosure is obtainable for victims and survivors. And the point with this new mechanism, the ICRIR, another acronym, of course, the point of this all is that for a victim survivor to obtain information, they are required to present themselves to this new body. And in so doing, they are essentially complicit with the potential for conditional immunity to then be offered. And that's something that is a psychological step too far for many people, because they don't feel able to do so. And we have seen no evidence that the terror organisations are in a place of generosity of spirit where they will come forward and will provide information in an honourable way. In fact, the very Secretary of State, the first interview he gave after the bill was placed in Parliament the other day, was the following: I can't give any guarantees that there's going to be people come forward to provide this information. That's a damn statement of any government.
Sorry to interrupt, if you thought that they would come forward and they would involve themselves in this process, would you then support the bill?
Well, critically, Emily, what's needed is there must be an acknowledgement of the wrong of the violence. That's how we break the cycle of violence in Northern Ireland. So if a perpetrator comes forward and says that I was involved in X, Y, and Z, I regret and I'm remorseful for what I have done, that's a different proposition for a victim survivor to then have to deal with. But that's not what's on the table. And we have time and time again said that there are other systemic issues which are impacting a victim survivor's quality of life in Northern Ireland. The ongoing glorification of terrorism and violence, which is absolutely unchecked. The issue of the definition of victim, which in law equates a victim with a perpetrator. And Emily, I want to also speak in this interview about the lack of will and contribution from the Republic of Ireland state. because there were two states connected into our issues here, and essentially the Republic of Ireland state adopts this position of observer status, essentially that we'll be there to quality proof what the Brits do. And that's not an acceptable position either.
Now, a lot of people, when they talk about this issue, they remember cases like Dennis Hutchings, the former soldier, who had a case hanging over his head for 6.5 years. He was very unwell. He was found not guilty twice, and then he was hauled back into the court. And a lot of people see this as a witch hunt against British soldiers relating to cases, allegations from decades, very many decades ago now. And they think, you know, is it really worth it? Can you see why people might feel that way, that they think it's a bit of a witch hunt when you have very elderly veterans going through the court system and even in this case, you know, dying whilst it's all going on?
I think, Emily, though, we're conflating two issues. The treatment of veterans and whether there were things that were right or things that were wrong and all of that. The point of the matter is that we're sitting in a situation where we're supporting victims and survivors of terrorism. And to give you one example, in County Fermanagh, where our organisation was birthed and is based, there's a 7% clearance rate. 93% of crimes have gone unresolved, were perpetrated by the IRA. You tell me what that population is meant to do with that level of injustice, and no acknowledgement, no recognition of the wrong of that violence. In fact, the leaders of the Provisional Republican movement say there's no alternative but to have done what they've done. And that narrative is increasingly being bought by people across the board. The other thing, Emily, that your listeners across GB need to understand is that the Belfast Agreement, when it was signed off, meant the following: that any pre-1988 crime, that someone would serve a maximum of 2 years if it was carried out in Northern Ireland. The crimes that were carried out in GB, right until this point, there was the potential for life to be handed down as a sentence, go from the potential of life to 0 in the stroke of a pen.
And just lastly, in your experience, how proactive has the Irish government been in terms of investigating crimes that took place on that side of the border?
Shockingly poor, Emily, absolutely poor. And we do have a situation at the moment where obviously it's been threatened that the Irish government could take an interstate case at the European Court of Human Rights against the United Kingdom in regards to this issue. They also need to examine their own house. And when you have a former Justice Minister over the time of the Belfast Agreement, Michael McDowell, indicating that a moratorium exists in the Republic of Ireland in regards to cases pre-1998, there's a great deal of hypocrisy there. What we want to see once and for all is the rule of law prevailing. We want to see people treated on a fair and equitable basis across the board. The on-the-run assurance letters could have been rescinded in law. That was possible. The UK government have had the opportunity here to really dismantle the ideology of terrorism, and they've balked at it. And that is not something that we can support.
Well, thank you very much for speaking to me, Kenny Donaldson there. Thank you very much for your time. Now, after the break, Stefan Kyriazis will be here to talk us through the final weeks of the Summer Theatre schedule. Stay tuned for that.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Weeknights on GB News from 6 p.m. You'll always get drama.
Please stop, Michelle.
I know, yeah.
Please stop.
Should I just shut up?
Romance.
You like me, I like you. There you go.
There you are. Well, don't tell anybody.
Adventure.
Etc.
That's the whole point. But
and action.
Sergeant, read my superstar panel that are already at it. They're fighting. It's going to be quite a show.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton, for 2 hours packed full of unfiltered opinions, unique takes, and fiery debates. I guarantee you blockbuster guests and exclusive reporting with no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I think there is a culture of collusion, quite frankly.
And no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio, and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Now, Stefan Kyriazis is here, and Stefan has been taking advantage of the good weather, and he's gone to Shakespeare's Globe this week. Now, tell us, what did you see?
I saw As You Like It.
Excellent.
And I have to say, if you haven't been to the Globe, please, please go. It's glorious, and I've been there in terrible weather as well, which adds a certain something.
I think I went on a school trip once.
Yeah, well,
Haven't been since.
Go again. It's
Oh.
glorious. It's wonderful. And I saw As You Like It. And this is an absolutely joyous, fun farce. And the Globe is embracing the modern world. So there's been lots of accusations against them of extreme wokery. So there's lots and lots of colour and gender-blind casting. There's lots of flipping things around. This play, Shock Horror, had some additional new text, bringing in some queer sensibilities. So the purists might be up in arms. I was there and I saw a crowd of all ages, all backgrounds, kids, grandparents, tourists, and all I saw was people laughing and having fun. And basically,
So it wasn't pushed down your throat?
no, this is the whole point. No, it's just, you think 400 years ago, women weren't allowed on stage. So you had men playing women. And Shakespeare knew what he was doing. He had fun with this. So he knew that his audience was watching a man dressed as a woman kissing a man.
Yeah.
So they were already playing and sort of being slightly naughty with it. What we have here, and I can't even get it all, forgive the pun, straight in my mind, is you have the two ladies, Rosalind and Celia, two young noble women that are oppressed by the mean old Duke. And so they flee into the forest, and Rosalind disguises herself as a boy. Now, so she is a girl dressed as a boy. Her cousin Celia is played by a non-binary actor, Macy Jacobs Sealocken, who is wonderful, arched eyebrows, very dry delivery. Is disguised as a more sort of outcast gypsy type. So there's already stuff going on. Their suitors, Orlando and Oliver, this time are played by women.
Okay.
With fantastic goatees and beards and lots of swagger. So you've got so much going on, but by the end you have girls dressed as boys and girls who are playing boys, kissing each other, and it's all going on. And all I saw was a crowd that cheered every kiss, laughed at every joke. The Globe does this incredible thing where they involve the crowd like you would have had in Shakespeare's day. So when the girls are disguising themselves, they point at the crowd when they're giving examples of we've got to disguise ourselves as peasants, and they take people's items of clothing. There's a wrestling match amongst the crowd. It's interactive, and that's what it was like back then. So it's as relevant then as now. The messages are still the same. It's still about love, identity, freedom.
So you didn't get the impression that they were trying to be overtly political?
No, and I have been at shows where it's being rammed down your throat.
It's a bit of a snore fest when it is, in my view.
Yeah, I
Mostly
agree.
because I'm usually a little bit too small C conservative for it.
I think the key with all of that for me is always illuminate something. Don't show and don't preach and don't tell. I can figure it out for myself. I can make my own mind out. But ultimately, respect the text, have fun with it, and present something uplifting or something positive. And that's what this does overwhelmingly.
Is this the way to keep the younger generations interested in Shakespeare?
Yeah, massively. I mean,
spruce them up a bit.
But this was what was going on back then. They were throwing food back then. They were eating. They were sort of jeering and booing the crowd back then. So no, I think the idea is just make it fun. Number one, if it's a comedy, not a tragedy. But yes, also reflect the world that we're in. Things are changing. Not everybody agrees. There are different approaches to it. But the world is changing, and especially for the younger people. But I saw all ages. It's not a cool, trendy thing for young people. I saw lots of people much older than myself there having a great time.
Well, most people, when they go to the theatre, they think to themselves, yeah, there'll probably be a little bit of woke stuff that may make me wince a little. But overall, it's just a very fun day out, and it's interesting, and people enjoy it, and that's great that this one was. I mean, it's got fabulous reviews.
Yep.
Time Out says it's joyous. The Daily Telegraph says it's exuberant. Director Ellen McDougall's delightful production is a pleasure, says the Daily Mail.
And we don't normally agree. We're all over the place normally. We're as fractious as the public. So for everyone, it actually agrees that this one is fun. The intentions are good.
Yeah.
The delivery is good. It's a great show.
Well, let's move on then. God of Carnage. What's this?
Again, this is about people, when you peel away the surfaces, finding out what's going on underneath. So this is by Yasmina Reza, French playwright. 2009, it swept Tony Awards, Olivier Awards. Everybody was going crazy about it. And it's basically two couples, one that are much more overtly signalled as right-wing, one much more left-wing and liberal. Their two sons, 11-year-olds, have got in a fight, and the more right-wing couple's son has hit the other boy with a stick, broken his front two teeth. So they've gathered in their very smart townhouse to discuss in a civilised manner how they will proceed. So back in 2009, all the attention was on how delicious it was with all the passive aggression going on underneath. Polite people were seething with dislike underneath. The play ends in an absolute drunken, angry, furious, chaotic mess when all the levels and layers have been peeled away, and basically they've all been horrible to each other, to themselves, to their own partners. And the tenor now is that people are saying, back then it was all about the delicious repression. Fast forward 14, 15 years later to reflect how we all deal now with conflict. And it's the ending that's resonating more with people, where it's just vitriol and anger and fury. And, have we lost any ability to have a polite conversation? So there's tons going on.
So the whole play is this simmering tension between these two couples over their sons who've fallen out. And they don't like each other because of their politics, but they never say that's the reason. Initially.
Eventually they say everything. But also what will happen is the couples occasionally turn on each other.
Yeah.
The two wives will band together. The husbands will get a bit pally, but then something will happen. Someone will say something. It'll all fall apart again. So it's this idea that people can connect even from different sides. You get close to an understanding, and then it all falls apart again, and people return to their kind of basic forms. The problem I have with the play is it uses a very heightened language. It's purposefully, some of the words are not words that you would really use in conversation. That's not the translation. Christopher Hampton has worked very closely with the playwright. It's on purpose. So it all becomes a little bit performative. And then, for some reason, the director, I think, has told all four on stage to dial it up. So Freema Agyeman, who plays the central character, Veronica, the very liberal signalling wife, it's lots of this and lots of... It's very over the top. And I think what it's saying is that we all perform. Nobody really shows their true selves, but even liberal values are just virtue signalling. It's ostentatious, but underneath she's enjoying a very comfortable middle-class life.
So it's not necessarily making any kind of statement about the right-wing couple being bad and the liberal couple being more worthy.
I don't think theatre's that simplistic. I don't think it's true that theatre just goes against against right-wing people. It's very able to also turn the light in both directions. I think what it does is point out that everybody... I think the problem is it ultimately points out that everybody underneath is performing shallow, bitter, a little bit unpleasant. You have 4 people on stage that ultimately you don't like anybody. And so this is a problem. So you're not ever supposed to be taking sides. But for me, I didn't really see a real person in the end. I just saw lots of tropes and types of both sides.
So you didn't actually recognise the characters. So you didn't like it very much, did you?
You do recognise them, but we've all seen people behave like... We've seen ourselves behave like that. We've all made little snide comments or a little aside to our loved ones about someone else, and they get caught doing so at one stage. But as it peels it away, I wanted to see a bit more. And I think that would be the difference for me between the two plays. One just illuminates human nature, which is what Shakespeare does so gloriously, and why we are still watching 400 years later. The other, I don't really think there is a political agenda, but it has an agenda that it thinks it's telling you about human nature. And I just felt a little bit lectured, a little bit, here, look at this, I will show you something. And it showed me stuff that I already knew, but didn't take me any further. There was no real person underneath any of that. So that would be my issue with that. Not the politics of it. It just doesn't really deliver believable characters. A little bit superficial, perhaps. Very, which the characters are supposed to be.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have anything left underneath, nowhere to take us. And the ending is just bleak and depressing.
I mean, for me, the best plays are where you manage to find a level of sympathy for characters that are totally different from yourself. And do you not feel that in this?
No, not at all for anybody on any side.
Oh, no. you have to warm to some of the characters, even if they're evil or even if they're nasty. Well, there you go. That's very good. I'll go see both.
Very blunt. Go and see one. Go and see one.
To both, then. I'll see As You Like It. I'll start with that.
Please
Shakespeare's Globe, although the weather is turning. But that won't let it.
Take your brolly or sit undercover. Don't stand.
Oh, of course, there is undercover.
So the seating I can't stand for 3 hours.
I just won't go in the mosh pit, as it were. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Stefan Kiriz is there taking us through the very latest in the theatre. So that's it for this hour, but I'll be back at the top of the hour and starting off with our ethical debate. The kiss that rocked Spanish football. Are chauvinistic men getting their just desserts, or has it all gone a little bit too far? Stay with us for that.
A brighter outlook with Boxed Solar. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, my name's Rachel Ayres and welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast brought to you by the Met Office. So some of you have woken up to heavy showers and thunderstorms, and these will continue throughout much of today. And these are being brought up from the continent, so through the English Channel and making their way northeastwards, with a cold front just bringing some rain, cloud and outbreaks of drizzle to the far northwest of Scotland. So heavy showers and thunderstorms really the name of the game throughout the rest of today. These could bring some pretty torrential downpours and frequent lightning, hail and also some strong gusty winds at times. But we are still looking at temperatures getting into the low 30s across the southeast once again today. As we head into this evening, those thunderstorms and showers will continue to make their way northeastwards, lingering for a time into the early hours of Monday across southern parts of Scotland, but drying up elsewhere with the best of any clear spells in the east. A bit of low cloud mist and fog though in places, especially for western coasts, and it's looking like another warm and humid night. So to start the new working week, some brightness, especially in the east at first, but cloud and outbreaks of rain making their way southeastwards throughout the day, with some heavy showers and potentially some further thunderstorms developing just ahead of this. But still feeling pretty pleasant in any of that sunshine, though temperatures not climbing quite as high as we've seen throughout the weekend.
A brighter outlook with Boxed Solar. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon and welcome to Sunday with Michael Portillo, this week hosted by me, Emily Carver. Now, we've got a busy afternoon of arts, culture and debate ahead. Make me immortal with a kiss, wrote Christopher Marlowe, and Luis Rubiales' kiss may indeed have given him immortal fame, but for all the wrong reasons. It's weeks now since the head of Spanish football planted an exuberant smooch on the lips of female striker Jenny Hermoso after the women's team defeated England in the World Cup final. But the fallout continues, including the sacking of the team coach and a criminal investigation. We'll be debating whether it's all got a bit out of hand, or perhaps is this comeuppance at last? And there are allegations of sexual assault. We're also in the headlines at the Venice Film Festival, with 3 directors variously accused, premiering their movies there, including Roman Polanski and Woody Allen. Their appearances sparked feminist protests. We'll be discussing that with journalist Judita da Silva, who is also a member of the Hollywood Foreign Press Association. She'll be with us and she'll be joining us later. And as the issue of free speech at universities continues to cause concern, over in the States, the prestigious Harvard University has been ranked the worst place of higher education for free expression. And by some margin, what's going on? The author of the report will join us to explain. Plus, we'll have an exclusive extract from Gloria De Piero's interview with Rory Stewart, where he talks about the downsides of a career in politics. I wonder what they will be. Before all that, here are your latest news headlines with Tatiana Sanchez.
Emily, thank you very much, and good afternoon. This is the latest from the GB Newsroom. We start with some breaking news in the last half hour. The TUC is reporting the government to the United Nations watchdog on workers' rights over the new law on strikes. It comes as the union's been hosting a conference in Liverpool today calling for a legal challenge to the legislation. They argue the new law is unworkable and will do nothing to resolve the disputes. The government says the new legislation is there to protect the lives of the general public and has recently announced a consultation on how the new law will be enacted. More than 2,000 people have died in what's described as the deadliest earthquake in Morocco since 1960. Survivors slept in the open for the second night after the 6.8 magnitude quake struck remote areas of the Atlas Mountains yesterday. Many fear their homes are no longer safe to return to, with the impact being felt right across the country. More than 2,000 people have been injured, half are in a critical condition. The Prime Minister says he's confronted Chinese Premier Li Qiang at the G20 summit in New Delhi over Beijing's alleged spying by two men in Westminster. The Sunday Times reported a man in his 30s and a man in his 20s were arrested in March under the Official Secrets Act. One of the men was a researcher with links to several Tory MPs, including Foreign Affairs Committee Chairwoman Alicia Cairns and Security Minister Tom Tugendhat. Both MPs denied any contact with the researcher. The Prime Minister says if this is true, it's totally unacceptable.
The right approach is to engage with people, but to raise the concerns that we have. That's what our allies do, and our strategy is completely aligned with our closest allies, whether that's America, Canada, Australia, Japan. You know, all these countries engage with China, raise areas of disagreement, as I did today on a range of different topics, but in particular to register my very strong concern about any interference with parliamentary democracy, which is obviously unacceptable.
The Justice Secretary says around 40 inmates have been moved out from Wandsworth Prison amid an investigation into Daniel Khalif's escape. The former soldier was on the run for 4 days after strapping himself to the bottom of a food delivery van. He was tackled from a bicycle on a canal towpath in Northolt by an officer yesterday. Alex Chalk says the prison is overcrowded, but promises the government is doing all it can to provide resources.
Out of an abundance of caution, we've taken 40 out to move elsewhere, just as we get to the bottom of what happened. Now, that is a sensible, interim, precautionary step. And I just also want to make the point about Wandsworth. You know, there have been issues with crowding, which I accept, which goes back for not just 5 years, or 25, 30 years. But the difference is we are doing something about it. So very, very significant investment going into prisons. 2 already built, 1 currently under construction. And these are big, big jails.
Russia has launched another air attack on Kyiv in the early hours of this morning, with blasts ringing out across the capital for almost 2 hours. A video has captured one of the 32 drones heading for residential buildings, with drone debris falling on several of the city's central districts. The attack comes as yesterday's G20 summit declaration stopped short of condemning Russia for the war in Ukraine, but rather highlighted the human suffering in the conflict. Ukraine says the declaration is nothing to be proud of. One of Kyiv's residents spoke of her fear during the latest attack.
It was a very frightening experience. I can't even put it into words. I heard a sound flying over, a rustling sound. Then there was a powerful explosion, followed by a huge flash of light. I live on the first floor, and the explosion wave was so strong that glass began falling down. My window curtain tore off, and the jars I had on my windowsill were shattered.
Defence cuts have left a gap in the UK's ability to fight from the air that will last well into the 2030s, according to MPs. The Commons Defence Committee says cuts set out in 2021 leaves Britain dangerously exposed and warned the military's combat air fleet is alarmingly low in number. MPs have noted, though, that the Ministry of Defence will spend more than £55 million sending pilots overseas for fast jet training because of a lack of aircraft availability. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying Play GB News. Now it's back to Emily.
Thank you, Tatiana. So it's the public display of affection that's echoed around the world after the Spanish women's football team defeated England, unfortunately, to win the World Cup. The ecstatic Spanish football boss grabbed the winning goal scorer and planted an enthusiastic kiss on her lips. Now, fast forward 3 weeks and Luis Rubiales is facing a criminal investigation for sexual assault. Not to mention the women's team's male coach, Jorge Vilda, having been sacked. So is the saga an example of women finally saying enough is enough when it comes to unwanted male attention, or has it all gone a bit too far? So to debate this, I am joined by journalist and author Julie Cook and mental health campaigner Yvette Caster. Thank you very much to you both for joining me. Julie, I'll start with you. Do you think there's been a bit of hysteria around all of this? Have we taken an enthusiastic kiss, as I called it, and decided to make an absolute, well, take too many, draw too many conclusions from it, let's say?
Yes, I think it has. I think it's been blown out of all proportion. As you said, it was a kiss on the mouth, but if you look at it, I looked at this kiss over and over this morning. I freeze-framed it, I looked at it. What he does is he grabs her in a kind of bear hug, he says something to her like, well done, and then he grabs around the head and puts a kiss on her face. Now, to me, that looked paternal. It looked paternal or sort of a friendly kiss. It's the kind of kiss you say, well done to your daughter or your child. I didn't see anything sexual about that kiss. It's a man full of pride. His own national team won. Don't forget, he's a Spaniard himself. His team won, although he's, the chair of the FA. And he was exuberant, he was excited, he was overjoyed in the moment. I didn't see anything sinister in that kiss.
Yvette, did you see something sinister in that kiss?
Yes, I think it's very easy to keep it simple, really. This is about consent. Whether you're a man, a woman, he, she, they. If somebody doesn't want to be grabbed and kissed, then you shouldn't grab and kiss them. It's pretty straightforward, and this is during a big sporting event. The eyes of the world are upon all the players. And it's really sad, actually, for Spain and the Spanish players who have worked so hard for so many years to get to this level, that their triumph, all their hard work has resulted in this story, really. It's really quite sad, I think, that a man has ruined it like this for them. And yet it's about consent, in my opinion.
But Yvette, do you think it's worthy of weeks of news headlines and everyone chipping in to give their view on what happened? A huge amount of judgment, people calling for his head, calling for this to be, a sexual assault charge on him. He's now having to go through a legal process, I believe. Do you think that perhaps that is distracting from real issues of sexual assault? Does this really count as sexual assault? Should it?
It does count as sexual assault. Yes, I think it does count as sexual assault. Some people might say, oh, well, it's not like he's jumped out of a bush. It's not like he's a rapist or anything. It was just a kiss on the lips. But let's think about this really in terms of their jobs. So if this was a workplace, if there were a team of salespeople and a manager grabbed an employee, grabbed her by the head, as you saw him doing, planted a kiss on the lips, would we say, oh, that's fine, that's just normal behaviour, that's just being enthusiastic, they've just won a contract, that's totally fine? No, that's, against sort of employment laws, and I don't see why it's any different in this situation. It's just not okay.
Julie, do you see that? And it's not okay. She didn't consent to this kiss. You can't just go around, locking lips with whoever you fancy just because you're just because you're excited. And then, of course, there's the power dynamic too. Surely he should be made an example of.
I can see our other guest points completely, and I think, you know, consent is needed, of course. And what he did was wrong. I'm not saying what he did was right. He did apologise afterwards for it, and I think, you know, yes, let's call out things that aren't consensual. But I think in many ways, going on and on and on about this, dare I say it, kind of undermines women who have truly experienced a sexual assault far greater, a sexual assault far more traumatic, and haven't had the same support or national outcry or even the police taking them seriously. I think this was clearly a man exuberant, as I say, happy in the moment, congratulating his fellow national team. And I think it's been blown out of all proportions. I also think that, you know, your game, I think I'm not pronouncing that right, Jorge Vilda, he's done so much for women's football, and he's now had his head on the block. You know, he's been 17 years bringing money to women's football, bringing respect to women's football. He's done an immense amount, and I think putting his head on the block as well, simply for sort of, you know, not crying out about this more, again, is just all out of proportion.
Yvette, can you see how some people believe this has been taken out of all proportion, and that the endless headlines on this subject are just a bit crazy? Can you understand why some people would think that, when you look at the amount of news it's generated, and women, unfortunately, are abused every day of the week, assaulted, and that perhaps this maybe is making light of the experience of people who have had serious sexual assault? Or should all instances of non-consensual touching, whether it's kissing or anything else, be taken as seriously? And this is very important for women's rights.
Well, I would say, yes, it's the thin end of the wedge. You know, there's a scale, isn't there? There's a scale of inappropriate behaviour, and there's a scale of sexual assaults. But I think we have to say no. So, you know, I think it's very straightforward consent, to be honest, whether it's a kiss or someone getting groped or, you know, a rape, to be honest. I think it's looking at behaviour, men in power, and how they use that power and how they then abuse that power. I can also see how maybe people from a different generation, like maybe in the 70s when things were maybe quite different in, say, the workplace, would read about this and think, oh, well, it's only a kiss. But times have changed. You know, we've had the Me Too movement. People have been thinking about things in a different way. I mean, I remember when I was younger, going to clubs sort of in my 20s and regularly just getting groped. And it was sort of like we just put up with it. But young women don't put up with it now. And that's good, you know, and it's right that people are complaining about these things. And I do think, yes, it is a shame that it's sort of maybe the focus has been on that rather than the victory. But at the same time, maybe we need to have these conversations so that people do finally start to get it and then start to accept that we can't behave like this.
Yeah.
And in terms of the thing about Vila, the manager, I mean, it wasn't just the fact that he didn't back up his team regarding the kiss. There were 15 women beforehand who were complaining about his conduct. Not in terms of anything. It was more to do with like how he was, whether he was being professional in terms of how he was training his players. So a lot of them felt that he wasn't doing a very good job there, that he wasn't being very supportive. And so a lot of them, you know, elite athletes, they chose not to go to the World Cup. So the top of their game, they chose not to get involved there. Can you imagine? Can you imagine sort of male England players being in that situation and having such a problem with the manager that they just go, no, we don't want to play in the World Cup because of how this manager is behaving. So I think there must be stuff that we just don't know about, that, you know, there's a reason that these women were sort of going, and I'm not implying anything, by the way, necessarily. I'm saying I don't know. But what I'm saying is like they obviously had a reason in terms of how he was behaving as a manager, his professionalism there. So I don't think it's all
feels
just
a
about
bit
this
like
kiss.
a Me Too movement for women's football. But Julie, I mean, I would be appalled if someone I trusted in a trusted position just decided to give me a big kiss in front of the world, and I didn't want it. Of course I would be. But do you think there's a risk that we over-police relationships between men and women?
I think there could be a danger of that at the moment. I agree completely with my co-debater here that, you know, it's great that it's being called out. It's great that women can stand up now and say, no, I don't want that. I'm a woman myself. I'm not saying I think we should go back to the dark ages, of course not. I just think that this particular example is so overanalyzed. As I say, I freeze-framed it to do this show today to really analyze it, and there's nothing to analyze there. You know, it's an exuberant, happy man grabbing someone, and yes, he overstepped the mark, and yes, it was wrong, but it wasn't sort of sinister. It wasn't behind closed doors. You know, the fact that it was in front of the world, I think, shows that he felt there was nothing sinister there. You know, it was just simply, I'm really pleased, I'm really proud of you. And as I say, to me, it looked quite paternal. And I think we also need to look at the culture here of kissing. You know, he's a Spanish guy. The continent are far more kissy than we are over here, certainly. I lived in Italy for 7 years, and people would regularly go up to each other and kiss each other, and it was, you know, it was completely normal. Historically, kissing has always been a thing. You know, the ancient Romans kissed each other on the mouth, you know, and I think we need to it's a kiss. It's just a kiss.
Yeah, I think we can probably all agree that it probably wasn't handled in the best way by Rubiales himself. But thank you very much indeed for your time, for that fantastic debate. Julie Cook and Yvette Caster there. It's a tricky one, that one, I think. I think it probably has been overblown when you look at all the issues that we face in the world, in this country, and in Spain as well. I mean, this seems pretty minor, but then you can say, you know, women need to obviously consent to their interactions with men, and that if this man can be used as an example to stop future men behaving in such a disrespectful way, then perhaps that's what needs to be done. But let me know what you think. And it's not just in Spain that allegations of predatory behaviour have been making waves. The Venice Film Festival saw controversy over the very same issue. We'll find out after the break what's going on with Judita De Silva.
A brighter outlook with Boxed Solar. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good afternoon, my name is Rachel Ayres and welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast brought to you by the Met Office. So there have been plenty of heavy showers and thunderstorms around already today, and if we look at this chart here, you can see these occlusions mark a bit of a focus for some of these showers as we go through the rest of today. So looking at this afternoon and this evening, a continuation of those thunderstorms where we could see some hail and strong gusty winds at times, and they will slowly clear away into the North Sea, lingering for a time there across southern Scotland before we see a band of cloud and rain make its way southeastwards. But that's all during what's going to be another warm and humid night. Starting the new working week, there will be some brightness across the east with any mist, fog and low cloud lifting and breaking through Monday morning before we see cloud and outbreaks of rain erratically spreading southeastwards. There's a chance of some showers and maybe some further heavy showers and thunderstorms developing just ahead of this, and those temperatures starting to come down from what we've seen through the weekend, so highs of 27 in the southeast. Now, as we look into Tuesday, that band of cloud and rain will become a little heavier, but slow moving as well as it moves into England and Wales, but becoming cooler and fresher behind with more in the way of brightness. And that sets the theme for the rest of the week, feeling quite changeable and autumnal, with those temperatures dropping down back towards average.
A brighter outlook with Boxed Solar. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Weeknights on GB News from 6 p.m. You'll always get drama.
Please stop, Michelle.
I know, yeah.
Please stop.
Should I just shut up?
Romance.
You like me, I like you. There you go.
There you are. Well, don't tell anybody.
Adventure.
Etc.
That's the whole point. But
And action.
Sergeant, the big read, my superstar panel, they're already at it. They're fighting. It's going to be quite a show.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton, for 2 hours packed full of unfiltered opinions, unique takes, and fiery debates. I guarantee you blockbuster guests and exclusive reporting with no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I think there is a culture of collusion, quite frankly.
And no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio, and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Now, the Venice Film Festival has just wrapped up and it's giving us an idea of what this year's Movie Awards season might look like. It wasn't without controversy as the red carpet was rolled out for filmmakers that have received the cold shoulder elsewhere recently, including Roman Polanski and Woody Allen. So to talk us through it, we've got member of the Hollywood Foreign Press Association, Judita da Silva, in the studio with me. Thank you very much indeed. Yes, there were some controversial faces, weren't there?
Yes, there were. It was expected when they announced the list of films that were going to be showing, and there was already issues then. But I think the biggest hero, we know that Roman Polanski's film was skewered by the press, and there was protests when the film was shown. But it was more so the Woody Allen thing because he showed up and there was women protesting outside. In the press, he spoke to all the big press outlets and addressed cancel culture, and he had what he's always had, which is a defiance about him that he doesn't acknowledge it, nothing has changed for him, he still gets films made. But when you know the movie business, he hardly gets distribution in the US. Woody Allen 10 years ago can pick up the phone to anyone. They will show up. Now they won't even take the call.
And remind us of the allegations.
So the allegations were against his daughter with Mia Farrow, Dylan Farrow, who said that she was molested by him when she was a child. HBO did a whole series about it. And he's maintained that he's innocent. And to this day, between the two children he had with Mia Farrow and also the adopted child that he ended up marrying, that's still his wife today, there's been a murky cloud around the Woody Allen name since then. And it's declined, the kind of luster he used to have back in the day.
So does Venice Film Festival take a rather laissez-faire approach to this type of thing?
I think they have a very European approach, that they are very idealistic about this utopian view of art is art and it exists above all else. So whether it's politics or any grievance you have interpersonally, it doesn't come to art. But unfortunately, art's an extension of human nature and they bleed into one another. And if someone is seen as being so elementally compromised, you cannot create that delineation between them.
And of course, I mean, that's a very interesting debate to have.
Yeah.
But of course, it conflicts with all the Me Too movement, of course, which was, you know, very powerful movement for a long time. But there you go, old faces there.
Yeah.
So why don't we have a look at the film that's taken the top prize, Poor Things, which stars Emma Stone.
Yeah, because this is a great one because it's directed by Yorgos Lanthimos, who directed The Favourites that made Olivia Colman an A-lister in Hollywood. And the thing with Emma Stone, ever since she won her Oscar for La La Land, she's been very clever about the films she's chosen. She's done The Favourite, she's teamed up with him again for Poor Things, and people have said she's the beating heart of this film. And chances are, come award season, she's going to be one of the names in the mix. But at Venice, if you win the Golden Lion, you can't go up for one of the best acting categories. Those went to Peter Sarsgaard in Memory and Kaylee Spenny in Priscilla.
It seems like women's stories are doing well.
They are doing very well indeed, because the big films like Ferrari, everyone says it's Adam Driver's film. But at Venice, everyone was talking about Penelope Cruz playing the jilted wife of Enzo Ferrari. She's a breathtaking in the film. And then when you go to the Priscilla, everyone's talking about Kaylee Spenny. And it's just it's a good thing to see that even though you don't have to push the feminist agenda, performances speak for themselves. So on the one side, you have the Woody Allen controversy, but then you have the talent of women bursting through. Sofia Coppola as a director, Ava DuVernay as a director, first black woman to be in competition. So it's a great look.
Well, thank you very much indeed for joining me on the sofa to take us through the Venice Film Festival. Lots of brilliant films, by the sound of it, that we'll be able to watch very soon. Now, the UK's oldest public outdoor swimming pool is to reopen to the public this weekend. It's taken 20 years for a group of volunteers to reconstruct and rebuild Cleveland pools in Bath. This weekend, they're finally opening the doors to the first swimmers in nearly 40 years. We sent our South West of England reporter, Jeff Moody, to have a little look around.
They haven't swum here since 1984. But finally, the UK's oldest Lido is back in business, thanks to Paul Simons and his team from Cleveland Pools Trust.
It's been a 20-year haul. At times it felt impossible. There's been a lot of things thrown in our way that's meant delays, additional costs, need for more fundraising. Ask our principal funders like the National Lottery Heritage Fund and Historic England and the Council, please, can we have a bit more money? And, you know, it's been really a labour of love, one has to say that.
The Lido has been here since the reign of George IV. Regency folk taking to the water, not just for exercise, but for entertainment too. Sally Helvey is head of Talks and Tours.
It was opened in July 1817. It had a little bit of a checkered history from the start, but I would say the most exciting era and the busiest era, apart from the more recent 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, was the Victorian era.
And that's thanks to local eccentric Captain Evans, who put on shows for crowds and hosted swimming competitions. The Half Moon Changing Block is Bath's smallest Georgian crescent. The restoration is as close to the original as possible, but what has changed, the swimmers themselves.
Very different, and of course it was all about immersion then, you know, and benefiting from immersion. And they would have had all these clothes on as well. I mean, the men, we believe, swam here naked. They were very much segregated from the women. And in fact, the ladies' pool building wouldn't have had a door and windows at the front, and it didn't have a roof. It had a 6-foot, we think, plunge pool. They would have come in at the back very discreetly, and actually the end building had a little fireplace in it, so perhaps they warmed up in there before they went home again.
It's taken grit and determination to restore these baths. From this weekend, swimmers will once more enjoy the Lido, and this time men and women will enjoy it together. Jeff Moody, GB News.
Lido or Lido, I wouldn't mind a trip there. It's very hot indeed this afternoon. Anyway, that was Jeff Moody. Now, in a few minutes, I'll be joined by Sean Stevens from the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression. He's going to tell me why America's most prestigious universities are also the most intolerant towards free speech. Before that, here are your news headlines with Tatiana Sanchez.
Emily, thank you very much and good afternoon. It's exactly 12:30. This is the latest from the GB Newsroom. More than 2,000 people have died in what's described as the deadliest earthquake in Morocco since 1960. Survivors slept in the open for the second night after the 6.8 magnitude quake struck remote areas of the Atlas Mountains yesterday. Many fear their homes are no longer safe to return to, with the impact being felt right across the country. More than 2,000 people have been injured. Half are in a critical condition. The TUC is reporting the government to the United Nations watchdog on workers' rights over the new law on strikes, ensuring minimum levels of service during industrial action. The TUC's General Secretary says the legislation falls far short of international legal standards, but the government says it's there to protect the lives of the general public and has recently announced a consultation on how the new law will be enacted. The Prime Minister says he's confronted Chinese Premier Li Qiang at the G20 summit in New Delhi over Beijing's alleged spying by two men in Westminster. The Sunday Times reported a man in his 30s and a man in his 20s were arrested in March under the Official Secrets Act. One of the men was a researcher with links to several Tory MPs. Both MPs denied any contact with the researcher. The Justice Secretary says around 40 inmates have been moved out from Wandsworth Prison amid an investigation into Daniel Khalif's escape. The former soldier was on the run for 4 days after strapping himself to the bottom of a food delivery van. He was tackled from a bicycle on a canal towpath in Northolt by an officer yesterday. You can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com. Emily's back after this.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Now, it's World Suicide Prevention Day today, and Gloria De Piero sat down with the former Conservative minister, Rory Stewart. He revealed harrowing details of a mental health crisis among MPs, and he also talks about his time in the front line of politics. This is Life and Times with Rory Stewart.
Rory Stewart, it's good to see you. We got elected back in 2010, different parties at the same time.
We're veterans together. We went through the ringer together.
We really did. Your list of achievements is far more impressive than mine. You are a former diplomat, you're a former Conservative cabinet minister, you're a former Tory leadership candidate, you're a co-host of the most successful politics podcast, an academic, and this book comes out the day after this is broadcast. And I really enjoyed it, and I'm going to talk largely to you about your experiences that you've detailed about your time in Westminster in the book. But first of all, I just want to ask you, do you wish you were sitting here as Prime Minister?
Yes, I do. I think it would have been a pretty tumultuous ride. It's not been easy. Brexit, COVID. But I felt that we had a real opportunity in 2019 to try to bring the country together a bit more. I felt it was terribly kind of divided and fractured. A friend of mine just pointed out that in the opinion polls, when you and I were in Parliament, 50% of people who voted Remain said they wouldn't speak to someone who'd voted Brexit, and vice versa. And only 25% of either side were prepared to allow their children to marry someone from the other camp. So I really felt that what we needed to do is bring people together, not get into this horrible standoff of us against them.
Do you see a future role for yourself in politics?
I think it's difficult. I mean, you know politics just as well as I do. I'm not somebody who's in a very easy position with parties. I sadly broke with the Conservative Party because I belong to a tradition of a much more, I guess, centrist, more traditional conservatism. And so I don't feel comfortable in the direction the party's going at the moment. At the same time, obviously, I'm not a Labour supporter because I have very traditional views about the world. So I think unless we change our electoral system, and it's one of the things I want to encourage, I think these parties are basically old, dead and broken. And the only way to actually bring some new, fresh ideas in is to do what New Zealand did, which is to change their electoral system, a bit more proportional representation, smaller parties coming in.
Have you decided who you're going to vote for next year?
I haven't, no. Usually when I get really stuck, I'm afraid I give up and vote for the Lib Dems.
OK, so let's talk about this memoir that you've written about your time in politics. You're very critical of Westminster, but you're also critical of yourself. And I've picked out a few quotes to illustrate this. Let's start with, the real person I despised in all of this is when you were in your first term as a Member of Parliament, the real person I despised in all of this was myself. Why?
Well, I'm, as you say, I'm quite critical of colleagues, but what I want to explain is that I was as bad, if not worse, than all of them. I think what Westminster does, and I don't know whether you felt this because you came in with a very impressive career before you came into Parliament, is it often takes people who outside Parliament are actually reasonable people, right? Very strange. I came in with people who were successful doctors, colonels in the army, business people, writers, historians, academics. And within a few months, we were all these sort of being treated like school children by the whips. It's a very, very odd system. Nothing is what it seems. It's like Alice in Wonderland. You're making speeches in the House of Commons chamber and literally nobody's listening. You know, all your colleagues are on their phones, except maybe your mum. And even she gives up pretty soon with listening to your speeches in the House of Commons. And you realise that the whole thing is basically about creeping up to your bosses. I rebelled against David Cameron when I was early on in my time in Parliament. And George Osborne said, if you rebel, we're not going to promote you for 5 years. Now, that doesn't sound like a big deal, I guess, to the public listening. They're like, fine. But actually, you've come into Parliament to try to do things and make a difference. And to spend 5 years stuck on the backbenches watching, you know, Liz Truss, who joined at the same time as you, becoming a cabinet minister, because you've rebelled once. And you end up, and this is why I ended up despising myself, I would find myself sort of creepily trying to sit next to David Cameron at lunch, and I'd send these texts saying, you know, congratulations on your latest policy that I didn't really believe in. And so I began to feel that I was being made in my early 40s into some kind of child.
And one of the things that you say in the book about sending texts, about praising the Prime Minister's latest initiatives, you say texts which even now make my ears burn with embarrassment. You feel a sense of shame at how you behave.
Because, you know, I, like you, and I like many members of Parliament, you know, I'd been the acting governor of an Iraqi province responsible for 3 million people, been a Harvard professor, I'd run a charity in Afghanistan. I thought that I was a reasonably substantial person. And I realised that as soon as I became an MP, all that's wiped out. Nobody takes you seriously anymore. I remember this guy called Archie Norman, who was the chief executive of Asda, came into the House of Commons.
Big figure.
Yeah. And you
Before.
would have thought that if you'd been the chief executive of Asda and run a huge supermarket chain, people would take you seriously. I remember all my colleagues saying, oh, we knocked him down to size. You know, we made him wait in the corner of the tea room. We didn't promote him. We showed him that it's literally, there are some wonderful people in Parliament. I mean, people I really loved, and I've praised a lot of them in the book. But there is also a group of people who are very, very bitter, unfortunately mostly men, feel passed over and feel that their basic mission in life is to try to humiliate other people.
You don't need to name names, I'd love you to. But did you feel, were there occasions when you felt you were being humiliated by colleagues on your own side?
Yeah, and actually on every time, it's a very odd process. I remember, for example, when I was elected to become chair of the Defence Select Committee, so, you know, this was quite a big honour for me. I was first-term MP. I'd stood, Labour MPs voted, Conservative MPs. I'd turn up for my first day to chair my committee. And there's a sort of mutiny, and these older MPs say, we demand that you never speak again to the press without our permission. And I'm thinking, what, is that a thing? Are they allowed to say that? Am I missing some unwritten rule of Parliament? The truth was, they're just making it up. They have no power at all to control my ability to speak to the press. But they're all sitting there, having worked this all out amongst themselves, because they're angry. They're angry that they've stood to be chair of the Defence Committee and I've been elected. And they want to knock me down a peg or two. It's a very... Now, why does this matter? It doesn't matter in terms of me. I mean, obviously, it's irrelevant, you know, my funny fragility, vanity, ego. What matters is that what that means for when these MPs become ministers. If you treat people as children, if you treat them as though they're incompetent, lazy, dishonest, you do not prepare them to take responsibility seriously and properly. And I felt, when I was eventually sitting around the cabinet table, that the 10 years of kind of hazing, sort of schoolyard hazing, doesn't produce proud, independent, confident decision makers. Right, even when they're at the cabinet table, they're still sending creepy texts to the Prime Minister, hoping they can get, you know, a slightly more senior job at the cabinet table.
Right, given everything you learned, I recognise a lot of what you say in it from my own experience. I want you to give some advice to the MPs, the new MPs, because it's only going to change from within, who get elected next year. How can they stop becoming these terrible creatures?
So you and I came in at the end of the expenses scandal, and I thought that was a huge opportunity that we missed. I think all of the 2010 intakes should have come together and said, actually, what was going on was disgusting. we're going to sign up to a code of conduct. We're not going to behave like this other lot. Instead of which, everybody was so delighted to be elected, they immediately wanted to be just like the people before. So I'd like to see the new MPs do that. I mean, I'm interested, I'd like to put it back on you though, because you went through exactly the same thing. And I worry, writing the book, that I'm going to come across as completely sort of bitter and unfair, because I'm more critical upon it. But do you feel it resonated with your experience?
It did, and actually, I think people, the machine expected me, because I'd been a television presenter, to be able to go out and advocate the party line a lot more. But what I realised is that I couldn't remember lines that had been written by somebody else and could make them look naturally. So I said, hang on, I have to step back. It's very difficult. It's abnormal to be able to deliver lines that somebody else has written.
And that you don't believe often. Yeah,
yeah, exactly.
Or you don't fully believe,
no,
or you don't
absolutely.
fully understand. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, no, it's very odd. And Liz Truss, Priti Patel, who were my first two bosses, were kind of masters at this. And I remember sort of watching them on television, radio, repeating. Yeah. I think in those days it was the long-term economic plan is working, the long-term economic plan is working. But I think, although that might work in the short term, it's very damaging in the long term. One of the reasons why the public don't trust politicians, why almost half the public says they now don't want to watch the news, is because of this.
We're much more comfortable talking about mental health these days. Thank goodness. Some very prominent people have smashed taboos, and there's been some great campaigns about this. I read something you said in your podcast, actually, about MPs' breakdowns and suicide attempts because you said the politics is deeply unpleasant. Did you watch some colleagues sort of crumble?
Oh, terrible. I mean, genuinely terrible. I mean, I don't want to talk about the specifics because this is deeply personal to people. But yes, colleagues tried to kill themselves, people I knew. I mean, in very serious ways, I mean, almost killed themselves. It was a miracle they weren't dead. There were other colleagues who had total breakdowns in the most humiliating, personal, embarrassing fashion possible in public. I mean, it was, and I think this is because the gap between the way that MPs are encouraged to present themselves to the public and who they really are is almost unsustainable for most people. It's mad because you're pretending to be this all-knowing, perfect, dynamic, confident, I've got the answers to everything, I know where we're going. The truth is, this is a country of 70 million people. Politicians don't really know what's going on. The idea that anybody actually understands what's going on in every hospital in this country is mad. And yet we pretend to the public, don't worry, I've got it fixed. You know, I'm sorting out the x-rays in the Carlisle Infirmary. You're not sorting out the x-rays in the Carlisle Infirmary, are you?
Final question, by the way, I could chat to you for a lot longer. I'm intrigued because a few years ago, you admitted smoking opium at a wedding in Iran. What's opium like?
Well, it didn't have much impact on me.
Oh.
So in this particular village, it's a polite thing. You're invited to the wedding and they pass it all the way around. So this thing got to me and I thought, I better be polite. And I then set off up the hill and I thought, I'm going to have this sort of strange out-of-body experience. But in fact, I had a very, very boring day. I was walking for 21 months across Asia and it was one of the most boring days of my 21-month walk.
Okay. Well, you've done a good job for the war on drugs there. Rory Stewart, genuine pleasure, and I'm sure this is going to do really well. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed.
Well, there you go. A rather broad-ranging interview there with Rory Stewart. Life as a politician, mental health issues, and yes, a little bit of drug taking there at the end. Well, leading on from that, latest NHS figures show that over 3.1 million people used mental health services outside of hospitals, an increase of 16.8% since 2020. Now, Isaac Kenyon from Devon is taking on a full Ironman off-road challenge today in North Devon to symbolise mental health struggles and encourage more of us to open up. So our national reporter Theo Chicomba has been to meet him.
After 6 months of training, Isaac is taking on the Ironman Challenge. It's a test of endurance where he'll swim 2.4 miles, cycle for 112 miles and run a full marathon. But this is no ordinary Ironman, as he'll be carrying 15 kg of iron.
So I wanted to do something that would, talk about this sort of problem that a lot of people are having with suicide, which is, 700,000 people in the world right now are, taking their life every year, and it's growing. So World Suicide Prevention Day, I decided to do a challenge that represents that sort of hidden burden that people carry, that I was carrying. And after university, when I had my mental health issues, I was carrying this hidden burden. And what actually helped was speaking out, open conversations, reducing the weight, getting rid of this.
And it's families like Alon's that Isaac is supporting. Their son took his own life in December 2016 after going through challenging times with his mental health. They say life hasn't been the same ever since.
No matter what Alon's mental health was, life was much better when he was around. And I just want to really put this, our life is shattered since he went. And his presence is so missed to everyone.
We did try and ask him to seek help. We said, go for a life coach, go and see a life coach, or we never said go and see a psychologist or whatever. Just go and get some helps, and he just was very angry with that suggestion. And personally, I always felt that we were helping him to keep on floating.
Mind charity centres like this one in St Albans operate across the country, providing facilities and sessions like this so people don't face mental health problems alone. They believe prevention is better than cure.
So since 2019, we've seen a 60% increase in the numbers of people coming to see us, which sounds a lot, and it is a lot of people. So where people might have come in 2019 or earlier, and they would have joined an art group and they would have done things that would support their recovery, now they're really wanting that one-to-one, which actually really stretches our capacity.
As for Isaac, his challenge certainly won't be easy, but he says it'll go a long way in raising awareness and removing the stigma around seeking help. Theo Chkumba, GB News.
Right, well, Martin Daubney has appeared. He's going to be taking over in just a few minutes. So, Martin, we've discussed all sorts, politics, arts, film festivals, everything. We've heard from Rory Stewart. What are you going to be doing?
Well, we're looking at Rishi Sunak at the G20, and once again, Rishi has found 1.6 billion quid to chuck at the Green Climate Change Fund.
Where is this money coming from?
Well, that is the big question, the £1.6 billion question. How come, we haven't got any money domestically? We're all feeling the pinch in the cost of living crisis. Seems to me, every time Rishi goes abroad, he sheds millions or billions of pounds. And it's like, well, hang on a minute. Doesn't charity begin at home? That's the first one. And also, they think it's a bit rich that India has 21 of the world's 30 most polluted cities. They're the third biggest polluter on the planet. And as Patrick says, they have a space programme. And wallop, we're giving £1.6 billion to help developing countries to not pollute. How about just don't pollute? Well, why should we pay the bill?
Well, I mean, what did Modi say? He said, the Prime Minister there, did he not say that he doesn't want to be lectured on climate change, yet we're giving lots of money in order to pursue climate change?
Well, I think the lecturing from Modi is working. People seem to be kowtowing to him, and certainly it's an expensive hobby. Also, at the same summit, there's news that Rishi might team up with Giorgia Meloni, of course, Italy's premier, who's had a hard line on allowing boats to land from North Africa into Italy. And so Rishi's promising to join up with her and stop the boats. Can he do that? Well, the only boat he stopped was the BBC Stockholm.
Can he do that? We'll find out on Martin Daubney's show. Stay tuned for that. Michael Portillo will be back next Sunday. Thank you very much indeed for joining me this morning. Thank you to all my guests, especially all of those who came into the studio. Please do enjoy your weekend. Enjoy the sunshine while it lasts, and goodbye.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good afternoon, my name is Rachel Ayres and welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast brought to you by the Met Office. So there have been plenty of heavy showers and thunderstorms around already today, and if we look at this chart here, you can see these occlusions mark a bit of a focus for some of these showers as we go through the rest of today. So looking at this afternoon and this evening, a continuation of those thunderstorms where we could see some hail and strong gusty winds at times, and they will slowly clear away into the North Sea, lingering for a time there across southern Scotland before we see a band of cloud and rain make its way southeastwards. But that's all during what's going to be another warm and humid night. Starting the new working week, there will be some brightness across the east, with any mist, fog and low cloud lifting and breaking through Monday morning, before we see cloud and outbreaks of rain erratically spreading southeastwards. There's a chance of some showers and maybe some further heavy showers and thunderstorms developing just ahead of this, and those temperatures starting to come down from what we've seen through the weekend, so highs of 27 in the southeast. Now, as we look into Tuesday, that band of cloud and rain will become a little heavier, but slow moving as well as it moves into England and Wales, but becoming cooler and fresher behind, with more in the way of brightness. And that sets the theme for the rest of the week, feeling quite changeable and autumnal, with those temperatures dropping down back towards average.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk